Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Nick Thompson. You may know me from Netflix Love is Blind, but on this podcast, we sit down with guests from all walks of life to hear their stories, remove stigmas, and understand what makes them tick. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Nick Thompson. I am your host, Nick Thompson. Welcome to the show. Today we have an amazing guest, and that guest is Saagar Enjeti from Breaking Points and the Realignment Podcast. Saagar actually followed me after watching Love is Blind Season 2 back in February when it released. He was surprised to see that I had actually already followed him and Crystal Ball on Instagram and had actually reached out over DM to say that he was happy for me and send congratulations on the show. We started DMing a little bit back and forth, and I revealed to him that I've actually been a big fan of his show with Crystal, which was formerly called The Hill Rising, which was a daily news show that was on YouTube, focused on the news, focused on the media. It's a pretty interesting show that I started watching around the 2019 election. I instantly enjoyed their show as a news and politics junkie that consumes a lot of different news, and I try to use all of these different perspectives or point of views to form opinions on things that I actually believe in and are not what someone is just telling me. They invited me on their show to talk about journalism and press freedom, which is a passion of mine, and talk about the state of the media and what's going on in our country. As an activist, as someone who's very vocal about their political and beliefs and critique of the media, I took this opportunity to go on that show. And I really considered that almost a dream come true because I was such a fan and I support independent media because I feel like we need that perspective that isn't bought and paid for. I've been thinking a lot about politics, as I usually do, but also about 2022 as we are about to have our midterms. Usually it's kind of predictable, I feel like, what's going to happen in the midterms. It's really the diehard political junkies or politically active people in our country that pay close attention during the midterms. I've been thinking about what's going to happen, what has happened in the last 2 years. Is this going to be sort of a referendum on Joe Biden's first 2 years in politics? Are we going to see new issues, populous issues, or are we still going to be voting basically against someone? So are we going to have a higher Republican voter turnout to vote against Biden? Or are we going to have a activated Democratic base that comes out to vote against things such as Roe v. Wade, even though that happened under Democratic House, Senate, and presidency? Are we going to have people still coming out to vote about inflation? Is it going to be gas prices? There's so many different factors into 2022 that I feel people are possibly activated to vote for. So as I was thinking about this, and I think about all of the problems in our society that aren't going away just because we have these hot topic issues like inflation, women's reproductive rights, these everyday problems aren't going away. We still have a homeless crisis in this country. We have addiction from opioids and fentanyl running amok in this country. We have all sorts of different kinds of culture issues as well. And we know that some people get very triggered and activated over the culture war. We have a crisis in journalism where the media is not doing their jobs of holding public officials and corporations accountable. What issues we have that are systemic in our country that are causing the rich to get richer and the poor to stay poor are really not going anywhere anytime soon. And now we have an election coming up in these midterms that it feels like we are voting on these hot button issues of the day and not actually the systemic things that are causing us so much unrest in this country. We're divided like never before. We are struggling to survive. Many people in the country can't even afford a $1,000 emergency. We have people that don't have health care that are ill. We have a crisis in not just healthcare, but health in general. We have people that are struggling with illnesses. We have chronic unhealthy habits in our country. We have a food system that is contributing to all the unhealthy outcomes in our country. We have a life expectancy that's decreased over the last 2 years in this country. There's all these systemic issues, and now we're going to an election, and we're, again, not talking about them. So I love what Saagar and Crystal and a lot of independent media is doing right now, because they are not-for-profit or they are crowd-funded. So they have customers that are normal people instead of customers that are Pfizer, other big pharma, that are Monsanto, that are Bayer, all the weapons manufacturers that are GE, that are Boeing, that are United Airlines, all these giant corporations that own the media that we see through their advertising. They pay to advertise on these news shows, and therefore these news shows will never critique anything that these corporations or these conglomerate rich people do. So when we have independent media and we're their customers, we're the ones that are paying their bills, we're the ones keeping the light on, we can hold them accountable with our dollars. Just like the big corporations do to the media. When you turn on CNN, you turn on Fox News, you turn on MSNBC, you pick up the Washington Post, you pick up the New York Times, or you go to their websites, probably more likely these days. They're getting it from the top. Outlets like Saagar's, Breaking Points, independent media outlets, they're getting funding from the people. And so I think we need to have more of these conversations about where we're getting our journalism and our news from. And so that's one of the big reasons I wanted to have Saagar on. Saagar and I do not agree on everything. In fact, we are probably closer than a lot of people would think just because of political labels. And that's why I wanted to have him on this show. I actually wanted to talk to Saagar about some of these issues that I mentioned before. What's going on, with our homeless crisis? Why are we not solving these issues? What's the state of journalism? How did we get Donald Trump in 2016? And how is it possible that we might get him again? I wanted to invite Saagar on because we don't agree on everything, but we have some common ground that we believe these crises are relevant. They're actually scary for the future of our country. We have a state of journalism that is in flux and difficult to navigate what's accurate and what's propaganda. And I really wanted to have him on and have this conversation as we head into the 2022 election and realize that, hey, there are alternatives to the mainstream media, and that doesn't mean it's fake news. They are actually doing reporting, in-depth coverage of the issues that are facing our country and the globe in a lot of instances. Bringing Saagar on and having a conversation today about journalism, some of the big issues facing our country, the possibility of what may or may not happen in 2022 and then again in 2024, I think is really exciting. We come from it with different angles. I come from it obviously as a consumer of news, but also as a person who has my own biases. And then he, of course, has his own biases, but he's covering all of this stuff day to day in his work and his content. Everyone's a human being is the theme. And while Saagar and I may not agree on everything, we have common ground and we can have a productive conversation. And I feel like there's going to be a lot to learn here, not only about how he sees things, what his worldview is, but also he's been on the inside. He's interviewed Donald Trump before, 4 times, I believe. And I think that getting this type of insight and having these type of conversations about the deep-seated issues facing our country and also the challenges facing us here in 2022 and heading into 2024 elections is going to be really productive. I hope you all enjoy this interview, and I want to say to check out Saagar, Breaking Points with Crystal and Saagar on YouTube, or the Realignment podcast, and give it a listen, and I think you're going to like what you hear. Without further ado, let's get to the interview with Saagar. I'm really excited about this one, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something new from it. Our guest today is Saagar Enjeti. He is the co-host of the YouTube news show and network Breaking Points with Crystal and Saagar. He also wrote a 2020 best-selling book with Crystal called The Populous Guide to 2020. He's the co-host of the Realignment podcast. His journalism has been cited in various media outlets such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, and he's also interviewed former President Trump a number of times as well. And he is the first blue check to reach out to me after Love is Blind that I fanboyed over. So Saagar, thank you for coming to the show.
See, that means
and
a lot
welcome.
to me. That means a lot to me, Nick. So it's great to see you, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you too. It was. I remember like sitting there seeing that, and I was like, "Oh my god."
See, I said, "Oh my god," because I'm like, I can't believe this guy follows me on Instagram. I'm like, this is so wild. I'm sure that you got actual celebrities who reached out to you, so it was a mutual admiration. I could say that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I've been following you. I think we talked about this. So since 2019, I started watching you and Crystal on Rising, and I've been into independent media for a long time, and it was cool to kind of like try to bring some of that mainstream, I guess. So here we are, trying to do some of that, I guess.
I think it's cool, man. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that you and I had talked about was that what is like only a couple of your political scenes, quote unquote, were actually made it into Netflix. That's such a tragedy because it could have been like a big red pilling moment.
Well, it is. And you know what's so funny is I think they stay away from it on purpose
Makes
because
sense.
they don't want to be in that sort of divide. But the funny thing is, the content I get that gets the most engagement is when I'm talking about DIY stuff, like making your own toothpaste or your own body wash or being healthy. And then when I talk about politics. And it's funny because I get notes from people that like literally think I'm like alt-right. And then people that think I'm a communist. And that was part of the reason for the show is I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I can talk to all of these people and we can come together on some things. So I think that's, it's just hilarious. But yeah, they cut most of that out. They actually asked me not to wear a Free Assange shirt when we were filming After the Altar too. That was a whole scene. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. I'm glad you're breaking that here. Good for you.
Yeah, I know.
You got to get this stuff out. Oh, so what is their thing? Here's what I don't understand about all this. It's like, what is the point? Like, isn't the point to actually feature said people? So it's like, that's who you are. So who gives a shit? Like, why does it matter to them?
It was literally like a half an hour discussion. And the whole point was they don't want to do something controversial that ends up with a scene that Netflix isn't comfortable showing, which means that entire day, which was the cleanup day, the day home, wouldn't be able to be used, or I would have to be cut out of it. And like, I get it. And ultimately I caved and I just did my own little photo shoot that day when I got home and posted it on Instagram. But it is interesting because politics is so taboo. But when you watch, and you brought this up with Top Gun, which I haven't seen yet, but that was like the first movie you had seen in so long, didn't have any kind of like political undertone to it. And I think to myself, I'm like, I kind of feel like we need to have some entertainment, but like also this is reality TV. And in reality, I'm listening to political podcasts, wellness podcasts, self-improvement podcasts all the time. Like, this is what I talk about. I force these issues on my friends and stuff.
I think that's very clear about what you said, which is that, look, if I'm going to watch a television show about people who are literally going to get married, then like, whenever people, especially somebody like you, I'm assuming you're probably top 5% type news consumer. It's like, that's part of your identity, right? Then how can you not, so if you're going to include the toothpaste, then like you kind of have to include, look, at the same time, I get it. I have friends with big Netflix contracts who are comedians and all of that. And like, I've heard horror stories about, the notes and how the production company, so I understand it from that level, but I don't think it was the right move. And I'm curious, like, what your takeaway from the whole experience is. Like, do you think it was a net positive? Do you think it was a net negative? Do you think it's just like net whatever? Like, what do you think?
It's interesting because I feel like I'm going through this insane process right now with that. And I don't know yet. I think there's some good that's come out of it, but I'll break another thing here. I don't talk to anyone else from the show anymore except Shane. And that's occasionally. Yeah, like it is... everybody is, we're different, right? And we're different
fine.
in the way that
no one expects you guys to be a family. Like, you're on a fucking TV show. That doesn't mean you guys are like going to be best friends. Like, who cares?
I know. Well, it's like this idea that like these scenes in these shows that are, and for the most part, like they don't really script much. They'll put you in scenarios where, hey, for After the Altar, you're all going to go stay in this house together. And they kind of let...
I'm going to be honest, that was weird, man. It was weird to watch. I can't imagine what
it was like. You watched it?
Oh, yeah.
That house is so freaking big that like, you really didn't notice. And there were times when I was like, where did everyone go? Because I felt like I was alone. But it was very weird. But they actually, like, they came to Danielle and I, and they were like, "Do you guys want to throw a party for after the altar?" And then they kind of let us plan it. I mean, they obviously paid for stuff, but there are like those elements of realism in it. But you know, a lot of the times, like even when we were filming and stuff, I didn't really talk to. I have a full-time job. Like I'm a marketing, like low-level executive. Like I'm busy, and you know, I have my personal stuff to do too, and I got to listen to all these news podcasts and find time to do that. But it's interesting because like I would get together when we were filming, and I wouldn't have seen these people since the last time we filmed. So I'd be like asking them all these questions, trying to catch up, which got me the gossip tagline or whatever they throw on me. But it's
you need to do yourself a favor and not read the comments, man. Like this is a thing. This is a good thing from engaging in politics. Okay, so people say a lot of horrible shit about you whenever you work in politics. So at a certain point, you just get used to it. And you're like, yeah, whatever. You know, people say what they say. It is what it is. Yeah, like
exactly. I remember like right before the show came out in February, I was listening to Joe Rogan, and he was like, I don't read the comments anymore. He's like, I just can't do it. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I think I'm secure. I think I'm comfortable with myself. But that guy's a caged fighter and the most watched person in media, like period, at this point. If he can't take it, how am I going to take it? And then, you know, I've heard you read the comments sometimes, right? I think I've heard you say that.
So I read production stuff. So so for context for people who are probably have no idea who I am, totally fine. We have like a premium subscriber member thing. So I read those comments, like the people who are actual paid customers.
Oh, gotcha.
Because they'll be like, hey, like I don't like the music, or, you know, they'll be like, hey, I don't like the background. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, we change the background, or like, I think this, or could you maybe send it at this? So I take the notes of my actual customers like very, very, very seriously, but general population, whatever. And I'm sure you probably have some experience with this now. Sometimes people you meet in the wild, 99% of people are cool. That's what I would say. 99.9%. Some people are really weird. Some people are very. So you also just have to let it brush off, and you're like, hey, you know, some people are weird. I'm not going to let it ruin my day.
Yeah, I'm kind of at that point, and I think I've done a good job. But it's crazy. I don't know where people get this stuff, but you know, it is what it is. So let's I want to, now that we've already talked about something somewhat serious, I want to ask you some fun questions to re-break the ice. Starting with, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Ooh, I wanted to be a politician, which is cringe, because now I spend all my time flogging them for my show.
They deserve it.
I think what it is, you got people who may be watching. I just love history. I always have. I always wanted to like be in the quote unquote like center of the action. And I got here at a very young age. I was only 18 years old, and immediately I was kind of like thrust into it. I had a internship even when I was 18. I'm not going to claim I had any power, but it was more like I was 18 years old. My very first day of college was my very first day of work too. So I was like putting on my suit. I'm straight out of high school on Capitol Hill. It was surreal for me. So I think the thing is for me is like I wanted to be in the center of it. I grew up in a town which was pretty small. I wasn't a huge fan, like kind of like where I was. My last 2 years of high school, I ended up living in Qatar. And for me, I just had this like deep sense of like, I just want to be at the center of it all, like Washington, and just like know how it works. And, you know, that's a blessing and a curse. It makes you very cynical. But
sure does.
But I wouldn't take it back. And, you know, it's kind of been my life's work, just kind of fulfilling a lot of that. So I don't think a lot of people could say that. You know, I grew up loving something and I actually got to work in it and reach a pretty good height in that profession. So, I mean, I would say that's a cool thing.
Well, yeah, and I think it's really cool, too, that you have been able to not only break off and do your own thing with Crystal and Breaking Points, but that you guys are growing at a rate that is far beyond maybe what your end game was when you started a little over a year ago.
Way beyond, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, for people who are just listening, I mean, we were a YouTube show called The Hill, and we were leaving, going independent. We had spoken to Joe Rogan. He was so nice. He was like, don't worry, I'll promote you. It's going to be fine. You're not going to think about it. But still, it's scary. Mm-hmm. We took all this credit card debt to like start the show on ourselves. Like, it wasn't a guarantee. You know, I mean, we bet the house, like no income, no more health insurance. Starting your own business, like buying all this stuff on credit cards. And it's just like, is it going to work out? I genuinely, it was totally up in the air. And then boom, it took off, you know, within the first week or whatever. We were like one of the top podcast in the entire United States. I think we were number 3, at the launch, which was insane. Like number 1 in politics on Apple and Spotify. To number 3 in the entire U.S. It was surreal, that experience. And so I just felt, this because you watch our show, I just feel like a tremendous kind of responsibility to build the network, quote unquote, and give people even more content, because so many people showed up for us that we have to continue to build and just fulfill the market demand. Like, it's not something that we set out to do. I just wanted to break even, pay my bills. That was it.
I can relate to that.
Victory is paying your bills. That's that was my victory. So to surpass that, I was like, whoa, like this is crazy.
That's awesome. And one of the things I think is cool, and we're when you guys were at the Hill, you've kind of alluded to self-censorship a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And I think like with the self-censorship, you almost now have the opposite, because you have an audience that is politically
very right,
basically
left.
Right, left. Yeah. So you have to cater now, instead of to the Hill, you have to cater to these audiences. How do you balance, not becoming too far one way or the other?
Oh, that's easy. It's the audience keeps us honest, which is, so we just did a live show in Atlanta. I know you're coming to our Chicago show. I'm excited to see you, which is that, you'll see there, Nick, it's 50-50, man. Like, we did a student loan thing. Half the audience is for.
I listened to
half
it.
The audience is against. And I love that. I love how all over the spectrum that people are. And what I actually loved most is they're all sitting together. People were having fun. I even heard that, people were like having quote unquote debates or whatever in the audience. I that's what it's all about to me. I mean, to me, the best compliments that I get on my work is, you help my relationship with my dad. Like, you help me understand where my person came from, or vice versa. Be like, I'm on the left, but like hearing you help me negotiate or talk with like my relative, or I'm on the right and honestly, like, I hated my, like relatives who were left, but Crystal helped me like understand that like what they're coming from. You know what I mean? Like that's very meaningful to me, because that means that like people's lives were like materially kind of improved by that in their reactions with each other, which is really what it's all about.
I completely agree. And that's one of the reasons I started this, was to bridge those gaps. But one thing that I think is super unique about what you and Crystal do, and really all of your affiliates and partners too, is you kind of represent people that are stigmatized, and I remember in 2016, I was looking around and I was the only person in my, Chicago liberal group saying, I think Trump's going to win. And why? Because I watched his rallies in Ohio. I listened to people that were being interviewed, and they were talking about the same things that my family's been dealing with, working collar, for 30 years since Bill Clinton. And I remember, like, this was terrifying, as I don't know how old I was, probably like 8 or 9. When Bill Clinton won, my grandpa was like, he's going to give our country away to China. Now, as a kid, I was thinking, oh my God, the Chinese are going to come take over. But in reality, he was talking about the jobs that he grew up doing, the jobs that my family did. My dad made refrigerators. My uncle was in tool and die. And, all of these jobs are essentially gone. I've seen my uncle bounce around so many times. So like, as I was listening to this, and I see you guys talking about it in 2019, I hear Jimmy and Kyle and all of these guys talking about it in 2016. And it's like, this is like the real voice of America. This is what's really going on. And whatever Maddow and Anderson Cooper and whoever those idiots on the news are saying, it's just nonsense. It's literally propaganda.
Here's what people need to understand, which is that the news is not built for you. It's built for the people in power. And I actually think that's fine. I just don't think that should be the only option. Really what it is that, look, the news is built as an industry which is insular. They're mostly reporting on stuff for each other, to reflect each other's opinions. Okay, once again, fine. Don't claim, though, to be unbiased, and don't claim also to be the sole source and the best source of information in the U.S. The fact is that you and I are having a conversation right now online, and the truth is that between my show, Joe Rogan, all this other stuff, hundreds of millions of people are listening to mediums like this much more than they are consuming quote-unquote mainstream news. So, I mean, of course, that belies the question, what does actual mainstream mean? But let's even put that aside, because I think mainstream is an important term and a moniker. Well, then it comes down to what does it mean then to have a country, which is what I saw in 2016. And I felt this very viscerally, by the way. I was a very junior reporter. I was only 24, 25, something like that. When all of that was going down, I was a White House correspondent. So I'm like thrust into this crazy position. I'm in the press corps. And I look around at all of these people, and they are all like, they're just have their head in the clouds. They like just don't get it. You know, all their questions are not about why people even voted for Trump in the first place. And look, I hope that there are people who are listening to this podcast who don't like Trump, because what I want those people to understand is you have to put your personal emotion out of it and try to just understand, like, why does someone pull the lever for this guy? That's the question, right? Like, that's it. Listen, when I met Trump in the Oval Office, I was like, I can't fucking believe this. I'm like, this is the guy from The Apprentice. Like, that's literally what I think in my head. But I'm like, this is the Oval Office. I'm like, you're the president, dude. Like, this is insane. Yeah. And I want people to let it sink in that, like, that happened. And not only did that happen, he almost won re-election. He only lost by 40,000 votes across 4 different states, okay? Like, people really need to let this sink in.
When I tell people that, which I learned from your show, they don't. I feel like they don't believe me.
They don't.
And I'm like, no, you don't understand. The Electoral College, it works in like a number of different ways. And when you pull those swing states that Biden ended up winning,
Georgia,
it wasn't
Arizona,
by
Wisconsin, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
If you add those 4 states up, we're only talking about 40,000. Georgia, you only won by like 6,000 votes, I believe. Everybody try and remember Election Day. And remember they waited a week in order to call it? It's because it was damn close, okay? So, listen, it could all happen all over again. So, let's ask why. Let's just ask why. Why? And when you ask that question, it's very interesting. You have 2 options. The mainstream presents you one option, which is that literally half the country is irredeemably racist and needs to be imprisoned, sexist, racist, whatever, has to be imprisoned. I'm like, well, I'm from Texas, and maybe this is why I can speak to this. I grew up in an evangelical area, which, by the way, I'm not saying I enjoyed it, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that these are irredeemably racist and sexist people. I don't necessarily agree with them. But now we're geographically not located in the same place. So whatever, you do what you want, I'm going to do what I want. And that type of thinking, which used to be pretty intrinsic to kind of the American project in terms of, look, may not agree, but people, it was inherent to like states and federalism of people in Wisconsin have different lives than people in New York City. And that's generally okay. And I think most of us could empathize with that. And I think that the main issue was that Trump's genius was he just knew how to dominate not only the media, but he dominated headspace for some folks who I don't want to be unkind, but it was not good for them. Like, I just saw a lot of people just lose their minds. When in reality, it's like, here's the other thing. Let's say you even disagree. There are plenty of politicians I disagree with. I have better shit to do. Like, I need to go to the gym.
Oh.
I need to worry about my job. I need to go have dinner with my girlfriend. I have pets. Like, I'd rather hang out with my cat or my dog. You know what I mean? Like, these are all things which are, people let politics occupy headspace that should have been occupied doing almost literally anything else, especially something social and like establishing like a social relationship.
I totally agree. And I think the interesting thing with the whole Trump thing, and he broke people's brains.
Yeah, he did.
I was just messaging earlier today with my friend who's a big fan, by the way, too.
Oh, nice.
And
shout out to him.
we were talking about how like Trump broke people's brains in so many ways that now it's just they hear the name and they're instantly triggered. Right. And they're triggered to like all of these things, all of these feelings of, oh my God, he's a racist. Oh my God, he's a sexist. Oh my God, he's going to come in and, overturn Roe v. Wade or whatever. And it's like, well, that's all happening right now. And
right.
By the way, materialistically, how is your life better? It's not. You just don't have to see his tweets on the news every day and every time you open up your computer and visit a website or open up a group chat and see, have you seen the latest thing, Trump? That's the only way your life has changed, which maybe for some people, that's fine. But at the bottom line is like, if you want to occupy rent in your brain with politics, do something about it. Don't just complain about Trump and then show up probably not even every 4 years and just go circle the big D and move about your life.
It's funny. I could tell kind of where you came from about why you got it. Like I could tell on the show, I'm like, oh man, this guy, it made sense to me because I'm like, oh, you know what? He's got a real working class background. I was like, no wonder this guy watches my show. Because as you were talking about with the China thing, you know, to some people in San Francisco or New York or whatever, they'd be like, well, that's racist. The idea that, you know, there's jobs to China. No, what your uncle, or it was your uncle, right? Who said that?
Uncle and dad.
Yeah, your uncle and dad. What were they talking about? They were talking about permanent normal trade relations. So if people have made it this far, let's talk about that. It's called PNTR. It was a vote in the year 2000 that passed by, I think, 98 or whatever to 2. There were like 2 people who voted against it. One of the people who made a major speech for it was a guy named Joseph Robinette Biden. And in that speech, what they claimed was that opening normal relations with China, as in we don't have to certify that they're in compliance with trade organization rules every year, we permanently establish that they are, would mean prosperity for America, prosperity for China, and here's the other key. This is the other key. More liberalization in China. As in, the idea was that if China and the U.S. become more economically intertwined, that China would become more democratic by opening its market. Now, let me just ask you on that basic level, did that happen? Is China less authoritarian today as a result of the economic success that they have reaped from the global financial system? The obvious answer is no. They're literally committing a genocide right now. Now, on top of that, let's put that aside. Let's say you don't even care about authoritarianism in China. Was this a good deal for the United States? Well, we lost a tremendous amount of our manufacturing capacity all throughout the entire Midwest. Not only that, our financial systems are now dramatically intertwined. Worse, our supply chain has completely moved over there. So you were talking about tool and die. That stuff is gone. They don't do that here anymore. Even if we wanted to bring it back, it takes 5 to 10 years. And then beyond that, there are all kinds of crazy social ramifications. So there's a decent amount of political science and sociological research to show that permanent normal trade relations with China led to a dramatic decline over a very short period of time of wages of working class men throughout the Midwest, which specifically led to more divorces, more people not being able to get married, and then here's the worst part, a lot more people becoming addicted to opioids because they don't have access to a proper market and they cannot afford, Nick, to leave. I mean, that's you got to move to Chicago, right? I got to move to Washington, D.C. This is not the norm, nor should it be. No. Some people want to live where they came from. So what? This is America.
Yeah, why are we stopping
What's wrong with that? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You want to live, my mom lives 1,000 miles away. That's a nice arrangement for me. It's a joke, Mom, if you're listening. But a lot of people want to live 5 miles from their mom, and I have no problem with it. In fact, I think the economic arrangements of our lives should be that if people want to move to a city, great. And if they don't want to move to a city, that's fine too. Nothing wrong with it. You shouldn't have to give up a ton of your lifetime earning potential because you want to live close by to your parents. That's a wrong system, and that's the current system that we live in today.
Well, I completely agree, and you put all that together, that ties into people living at home longer than they ideally should or even want to in most cases. Right. And, it just creates this like trickle effect of an economy that just really doesn't work for the majority of people. And I think you said this, I think yesterday or Tuesday, I literally listen to the show every day, yesterday or Tuesday, so they blend together. But you were talking about how the wage gap between the college educated is now, and the non-college educated is even shrinking more, which, I know that, but I sit here with a lot of student debt and no idea how I'm ever going to pay it off. Maybe I'll hit it big in the
hopefully this podcast
scene.
Takes off.
Right.
Look, that is exactly right, which is that the problem that we have is that the college wage premium is either gone down or in some cases has disappeared altogether. So it's a corrupt bargain because people take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt at the very minimum. Okay, so where did you go to college? Where did you go to school?
It's called Full Sail University. It's under investigation, I think, currently.
Well, that's an issue. Was it in-state or out-of-state or private?
It was private.
Okay. So private is actually the bleeding edge of the worst offenders. So that probably explains also why you have a tremendous amount. But let's say you're in Chicago. So the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, great school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even that, Urbana-Champaign, fantastic school, doesn't even accept that many people. If you are lucky to live in the state of Illinois and go to Urbana-Champaign, you're still going to be shelling out on average. I don't actually even know what the tuition is there. I probably would bet it's higher because it's a better school. On average, some $40,000, $50,000 for a 4-year college degree.
At least when
exactly. Go ahead.
When I was applying to colleges, and this is now almost 20 years ago, actually, it was like $8,000 a year then.
Right, exactly. That was
In-state.
$8,000 a year in state then. So that's an insane amount of money. That's $32,000. So now we're talking about 50, 55. That is the median household income pre-tax in the entire United States. So just consider that. So okay, then let's think about how much we'd have to save, and then let's also look at the U.S. savings rate, which is I think some 40-50% of the U.S. population is I like to call it a blown tire away from bankruptcy, aka could not survive an immediate household emergency. Like let's say you're driving, tire blows out. Now you got to pay for, let's say you don't have AAA or whatever. You have to pay for a tow truck and you got to get a new tire. You're looking at a minimum $400, maybe $500.
Oh,
Most
if you
people can't
damaged
pay it.
your rim or the wheel or anything, you're looking at thousands.
It happened to me. I hit a curb because I'm a moron. Had to buy a brand new tire. It was $750. I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm in the position in order to do something like that. However, a lot of people aren't. So when you think about that, and then you also look at trends. So that's the current situation. Let's look at right now, 2022 September, in which you and I are recording this. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have the highest credit card debt on record since 2008. At the same time, we are looking at bank balances and more, and it's one of these weird situations where people have cash, and yet their consumer habits and all of that are changing. But then inflation is eating away at many of these savings, and the wash point, the tipping point as to when people really go into the actual red, we may already be there. We don't have enough real-time data. So, and I think that's reflected in polling data, which is that Americans are pissed off at the state of the economy. And it's always funny because my least favorite type of pundit are the people who are like, no, actually the economy is fine. They're like, you ungrateful, you ungrateful proles. Like, don't you know that Joe Biden has dropped the price of gas by $1? I'm like, yeah, that's great, $1. But $3.70 is still high. I don't know what it is in Chicago, but out here we're paying $4.20 a gallon.
It's like over $5, I think.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
This is the thing. I was recently talking about the Hurricane Ian.
Mm-hmm.
There are thousands of people who literally couldn't afford to leave. And
I know.
And it's one of those, I heard that on the news, and everybody actually attacked me whenever I kind of put that out there, because I was like, hey, I just heard on the news that there are people who literally cannot afford to leave because they can't afford gas. I'm like, I think that's crazy. And it makes sense. You need a week, 2 weeks of rations plus ability to stay in a motel. What if you don't have a family nearby? What are you going to do? Some of these people are old. They're on Social Security. They're just going to let them sit there and rot? And shelter, okay, I mean, they fill up very, very quickly. What if you lose your house? You got to file an insurance claim. I mean, that's if you're lucky enough to buy a house. What if the place you rent just died? I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah, what do you do in the meantime? What do you do in the meantime?
Exactly right. And it's there's all these questions, and everybody says, oh, we're going to help. And look, I hope so. Usually within a week or two, though, the country moves on. Let's be honest. Hurricane really going to be at the top of the news?
No.
No, it's not. Let's just be real. And I don't want to sound callous. I'm saying that is why the system is broken, because it shouldn't have to be at the whims of whatever the news cycle should be. It's these things should be intrinsic to how the economy works.
Well, I think there's so many things that go into, because I agree with you. I don't think we'll be talking about Ian in a week.
Yeah.
And then you say this a lot, and this actually resonates with me. Americans are good people. We're well-meaning people. I truly believe that too. But we have a system in place, text this number right now to donate $10 to help victims of Hurricane Ian. And you do that and you feel like you've done something. So you kind of let that guilt go. But the reality is these people aren't going to have houses for months. Who knows if another hurricane's going to come? Right. And what do they do in the meantime? The insurance isn't going to Venmo them their insurance money. There's going to be an entire process there. They're going to have to rebuild or rebuy their house, and or rebuy a new house. And how does that not get covered? It's like, how does it not get covered that there's like homeless people all over Chicago? I talk about this every chance I get because like I say hi to them. I meet them. There's a veteran outside my Target that I've seen for 2 years who every time I see him, like I say hi, I talk to him, I'll buy him something sometimes. And his story is just, it's just really sad. And I'm not going to tell it for him, but like, how do we just walk through our lives and see that our country's like collapsing, whether it be from Hurricane Ian, people losing their jobs, not affording gas, not affording food, and just go about our lives? I don't understand that.
Well, that's very different. I mean, I think the real issue is that, and I do believe to my core Americans are good people. I think most Americans get the shirt off your back if you were in a tough spot. The issue is that when problems become very big, individual agency no longer really plays a role. So, for example, like you buying that guy, which is very admirable, but like, what are you going to do? You're going to do it for every single person? And in Chicago, I mean, I don't know if you've been to LA or San Francisco lately, it's horrific. I mean, I cannot describe the human tragedy of what Skid Row is like. And the truth is that everybody just ignores it. And it's like, I'm serious. Like I have been to some of the like third world countries all over the world. I've been to slums in India. I've seen people shit in streets. I have been to Cambodia. I have seen people with their legs blown off from landmines. And I'm telling you, one of the most horrific things I have ever seen is Skid Row, downtown Los Angeles. It is like and I'm describing it this way. I'm not denigrating them. It is an open air drug market. There are, it's a tragedy, and I mean that. Like one of my Uber drivers who drove me through was telling me.
I got driven through when I was there too.
He said 2 years ago. He goes, I was a meth addict. I was out there on the street. He said girls out there getting raped every single day for fentanyl, and this is why. And look, I want to be stark because this is the reality of what we allowed to happen. Mm-hmm. But here's why. Like, why does this happen? And it's because of ideology, of money, and of a deep like apathy to, if we just let it happen in Skid Row, then whatever, it's not my issue. And I think that the truth is that everybody needs to give a little bit. So like I have really, really, really come around on how we should deal with this. Like at a certain point, I'm just like, look, penalization is just not going to work here. At the same time, like allowing people to camp out in the streets, like I understand why some people might think that is okay, but the truth is that, as I just said, these people are addicts and they need treatment and they need help. Mm-hmm. And allowing them to be preyed on by predatory drug dealers and by rapists and other sexual criminals is actually deeply wrong. And as a society, like we owe them protection. Now, that doesn't mean that we should throw them in jail. What we need means is that we need to make sure that they have access to actual treatment. And one of the things that everybody kind of covers up, and this is just, look, we have to be real honest here, which is that in a lot of these encampments, these people are not, quote unquote, homeless because they can't afford a house. That is true, but that's not the sole reason. They are straight up drug addicts. And I mean, strung out on fentanyl, and frankly, a lot of them are okay with it. And I think that, look, I encourage people to go and look at interviews with these actual folks, and like you said, actually talk to them, because like most of them are pretty honest. A lot of them who've been interviewed, Skid Row, and in San Francisco and others, are like very open. Many of them also have mental illness. Like allowing that to happen and be a threat like to themselves, like forget about us. Like let's actually care about like their actual well-being. It's not in their best interest. Like they get preyed upon. You know, I'm friends with somebody who works in the ER, and man, they get people who walk in there with open drug abscesses, like necrotic tissue leaking out of their legs, and they'll be like, "We need you to stay for amputation or whatever," and they're like, "No," they're like, "I don't care," and they'll be out of there, and the doctors are like, "That person is literally gonna be dead in like 2 weeks," and it's like that is the reality of like what we're allowing, you know, and I just think people need to internalize like what the reality of this stuff. Yeah.
Well, and I always say too, like those folks, they may be okay with it now, but when they were growing up, they didn't want to be homeless. They didn't want to have mental illness. They didn't want to be drug addicts. So what happened in society that broke from our perspective of sort of having a culture of taking care of one another because we're all human beings, like what broke there that put them in this position where like this guy doesn't care that his leg needs to be amputated, he's going to die in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we could go all the way back to the opioid crisis and the overprescription of opioid. That definitely is like the spark that lit the fire. But I actually think that focusing on that almost, and by the way, I think those people are criminals, and I think every single one of them should go to jail, whoever played a role in that. Part of the issue is we're way past that. We are not in our hair, this is the thing. Heroin is no longer our problem. It was our problem in 2015. Fentanyl is our problem right now, which is that we have a substance which is even more addictive and more potent and very, small, that is so, if you think heroin was bad, like this is what is dropping people left and right. The number one cause of death in this country for 18 to 49-year-olds is literally opioid abuse or overdose, fentanyl overdose specifically, more so than car accidents, which is what it has been for young people in this country for decades. So, and it is part of the reason why I did a whole thing on this. U.S. life expectancy dropped from 2019 to 2022. Everybody's like, yeah, of course, Saagar, that's because of COVID. Put COVID out of it. Put COVID out. COVID is 1/10 of part of the reason. We got diabetics. We have a tremendous amount of this country. Almost 10% of this country has straight up diabetes. 30% of the country is pre-diabetic. Many people are either addicted to opioids already and on the way to an eventual fentanyl overdose, unfortunately, given the way that our pain management and all of that is set up. And then we also have deep underlying health conditions. You should also, there's a great book, Atomic Habits, but it's got James Clear. And one of the most famous examples that everybody focuses on is a lot of our soldiers in Vietnam were addicted to heroin. And then they came back and everybody was predicting a mass heroin epidemic in America amongst these former soldiers. And none of them were still addicted to heroin. And it's because they weren't in the terrible environment of Vietnam. They had job prospects. They had wives. They had families. And they're like, yeah, you know what? And again, this is a drug with an 87% recidivism rate. So I think the lesson from that is that if the conditions of your life are good, a lot of people can kick heroin. Some people were still addicted to heroin, but it wasn't a mass epidemic. We have a stronger problem with heroin right now than we did back then in the 1970s. So I take some inspiration of, no, actually, like if you create the conditions in society such that people don't really feel the need to do heroin, even though it's an incredibly addictive substance, they won't do it. And that's a good thing. So like, we got to acknowledge the dark so that we can like lean into the light.
I did not know that about heroin and the veterans. That's really, really interesting. I think I agree with everything you said from that being the issue, right? We have to address the thing. But what I think happens, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too, what I think happens, we have so much pride being American that even to the point where you have some of these, Trump supporters that still don't have their manufacturing job back, right? They're still living paycheck to paycheck, working at the local fast food restaurant, which, by the way, is probably all they can afford to eat in a food desert, right? So they're going to have all these underlying health conditions, and there's your path for all this stuff you were just talking about. But like, I feel like we have this inability to look inward as a country, especially those of us who are okay, that we have to look at it and be like, well, how could this same country that promises freedom, liberty, and the American dream, how could we have this here? I feel like we have a hard time doing that. And we would just rather live in a world where America is the American dream. And that's not the case for most people.
It's really hard. I see every side of it. So I'll give you my case for like why it is that way and why it all probably always will. We're just an exceptionally free country. And I know a lot of people are going to be upset about that. But I've lived a lot of places all over the world, and let me tell you something. They don't have no First Amendment, even in the UK or in Australia. Go take a look at what happened there during COVID. In the UK, they could just be like, hey, you can't print that the Queen is dead, even if you have the knowledge. You can't do that in this country. You literally cannot do that in this country. I'm not saying that doesn't occasionally happen through unspoken agreements, but that's not the same as the law. And that's the case in Germany, that's the case in France, that's the case in all of Europe. In America, you just have a shit ton more freedom to basically do whatever you want. Now, that's a good thing, and that's a bad thing. It leads to variance, as in, for example, with our income. We have the best healthcare in the entire world. If you're in the top 15% of the U.S. population in terms of income, if you're in the top 10%, you're going to live till 90 years old. That's crazy. It's just the issue is that you're only going to live till like 65 if you're in the bottom 10%. Now, Europe lacks the variance, but they don't have the best healthcare for the top 15. So the whole question is like, well, how do we balance and like spread that out? My contention is that I think the variance is good to a degree. And that what I really try to focus on is the median. So I'm like, okay, in the 1960s in the United States, post-Civil War era, what is it exactly about that time period, which while it was chaotic and all of that, why were the fundamentals actually strong? If you go back, there's a great website I've recommended called WTF Happened in 1971, and it just has all these amazing charts. And in every single one of these charts, it talks about wages and inflation. So wages and inflation were 1-to-1 right up until 1971. So inflation goes up to 7%, wages go up to 7%. Okay. Right. One of my favorite graphics is actually cost of living in 1971. So the average income was $10,000. The average house cost was $25,000. Price of gas was like 80 cents or something like that. And I'm looking at it, and it's not even about the absolute dollar amount. I'm like, wait, if you only make 10 grand, every single one of these things is very affordable, right? Like, right. If you make 10 grand at $25,000 house, that's not crazy. You can easily save up for that. Whereas, and I actually just posted this. Let me just read this for the audience because I think this is an important graphic for people to take away. Okay, for a $2,500 monthly payment on your mortgage, and you have 20% down, assuming you have 20% down, right?
Which no one really
which
has.
Basically nobody has. All right, so one could afford today a $476,000 house. In early 2021, they could have afforded $759,000. Now that is because of mortgage rates. But of course, so there's a lot going on right there. Number one, which is the interest rates and the way they are right now, is holding people back. But number two, which is, and you got to that, who's got 20% down on a $476,000 house? And then, let's go a step further. Nick, what can you buy for $476,000 in Chicago? Like a studio? Maybe? I don't even know, actually. I don't know anything about Chicago.
I have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Okay. Mine would probably appraise around that today.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay, well, Chicago's a lot cheaper than the East Coast, so congratulations. Because, here, you couldn't get a studio apartment for that.
I put 5% down, and I was a marketing executive at a software company. Like I was well paid, and I saved for a year, and I had some nice things fall my way financially. But like that's all I could afford to do is put 5% down.
Right, and you are also getting bilked because we should explain about mortgage insurance and how that works, which is that you have an extra payment that you are literally required for people who don't own houses. Like this is. I had to investigate this in terms of how it works, which is that when you don't put less than 20, then you have to put down insurance, which is literally just money to the bank because you are too poor in order to have 20%. It's like when you think about the richer you get, you actually pay less in terms of fees. Mm-hmm. And that's a crazy thing to realize. And none of this existed in the 1970s. If you had $10,000 a year, you could realistically put aside 10% of your income, and you could really save for a 25% down payment in not that long of time. I just read a great piece about the disappearance of the starter home. There are no more starter homes. Starter homes are dead. The starter homes of 1970s are now $1 million houses here in Washington, D.C.
Yep. I was going to tell you, my parents bought their first starter home. I was probably 4, so they were like 20, maybe my dad was 25, my mom was 24 at the time. And they bought a starter home. And again, like my mom didn't work. She had 3 kids.
That's amazing.
And she had to get a part-time job at some point in there, but that was my dad losing his job building refrigerators. Right. It's wild to think about that stuff.
That doesn't imagine a 24-year-old today buying a house. Unless you live in a rural area, it's not going to happen. No. The odds are that person didn't basically the odds are like the average 24-year-old, the median 24-year-old didn't go to college. They have a tremendous amount of credit card debt. They're working an entry-level position. At best, they're making between $35,000 to $45,000 at a median level. They probably live in a economically at least downwardly mobile area, and their best chance of success is to move to a city. Like it should just not be that way. And that is what I'm obsessed with. It's just like, how do you help the median American. Because, like I said, the top, obviously they're doing super well. And even the bottom, like, to a certain extent, we have a decent amount of social programs. I'm not going to say they go far enough, but, people who are in the bottom 15, they have, like, the EITC. They get, like, a lot of money. There is welfare, obviously. So, like, the bottom, it's everybody in between. That's the real struggle. That's, like, the struggle area where ain't no social program for you. And if you get hit on the highway, it's going to be a tough time, man.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, it's so sad too, because like I feel like this is also, it stops people from taking vacation. It stops people from traveling.
Oh, yeah.
It stops people from doing leisurely activities that actually keep them mentally stable, right? Keep them physically feeling good. It stops you from, I used to love to play flag football, and I went a bit without insurance and I stopped playing it. And it's a stupid little thing, but like I missed it. It was the competitive nature of it was so fun. But the thought of breaking my ankle or God forbid tearing an ACL or something, which happens in flag football too, it stopped me from doing that. And I always think about that and I'm like, wow. And then there's people who literally can't ever go on vacation or can't take any chances or have to pick up their second and third job, which I just saw a headline today that blew my mind on that, where they were saying I couldn't even bring myself to read it. It's such bullshit. They were saying that the key to burnout is to work more. Yeah. That's how you're going to solve burnout. Yeah,
well,
sounds about right.
To be honest with you, even the whole term burnout is such a bullshit white collar phenomenon. Like, the hardest working people I've ever met. I remember once I was in a coffee shop. This was pre-COVID, and this woman is manning the barista. Her 4-year-old child is sitting in the corner on her iPad, and she has to go and check on her kid. I was like, "Hey, is everything okay?" And she was like, "Oh, I couldn't afford the daycare, so I just bring her to work with me." You think that lady is bitching about burnout on Twitter? Like, she's just trying to make it. And like
trying to get through the day.
Exactly. I'm like, these are the people that I am going to think about. And in general, like a lot of this white collar work phenomenon. By the way, look, I don't believe in full back to the office or any of that. And I'm for workers, like whomever you are. But like, I am just very real about the exact like type of workers across this country who genuinely are oppressed and who really... I think about things. There are laws that I would love to pass, of which I don't think anybody in elite circles could even understand. Like clopening. Like when you have to close and then open, which effectively, like you have to on the closing shift, and then you have to open, right? So, like, I think we should just ban that. And it's one of those things where I don't even think people in Washington would even understand what the fuck I'm talking about. And I'm like,
not.
Right, but I'm like, that costs people, like, putting people 6 hours of sleep for years, that makes them unhealthy, screws with their circadian rhythms, screws with their lives. Here's another one. Bosses have to actually set your schedule a week in advance. Like, very basic things like this. And again, look, the bosses, you can schedule them however you want. You just can't leave people hanging. It's not right. You got to give people some structure. What about daycare, healthcare? Or, you can't just text someone. I hear about this stuff all the time. Like, hey, you're on opening tomorrow. And it's like, my ass needs to be at the store at 6 a.m. and you give me a heads up at like 7? What am I supposed to do? That's the stuff, which, again, people in white collar have no experience with. Like, I'm sorry your boss was mean to you. Listen, I've worked in I get it. It's actually really annoying. But there's a difference between annoying and like genuinely have no freedom and no governance over the conditions of your life. Yeah.
When I worked at Old Navy, and they changed this actually while I was working there, but I was 18, I think. They had this variable schedule thing where if, let's say it's Friday, right? I would work either 5 to close, which would be about 5 to 10:30, or within an hour or 2 hours, they could call and say, we need you to come in at 3.
Right.
So my whole day would just be sitting there waiting for them to tell me, yes, you need to come in at 3 or no, you don't.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, when you let me know that at 1 or 2 o'clock, it's too late for me to get anything done other than to get ready and go to work to be there at 5. And that kind of stuff is not fair. It takes away people's actual freedom to live their life, their time with their family, their time with their friends, their time with themselves, their time to read, their time
do
to salute.
anything. Yeah.
Anything.
Right.
It's crazy. I've
been there. I know exactly what you're talking about. Because it's like, are you really free when you're waiting 2 hours just to go to work? Or, and look, even white collar people, how annoying it is to sit there and just wait for an email from somebody? Your whole mind is obsessed with it. You're like, when is this guy going to come in? All of this. Now imagine that, it's like that stuff is not right. And yeah, like all I'm trying to say is, let's really all come and the laws that I'm talking about here, I want to see who votes against that. Go ahead and justify that. Now we're going to have an interesting conversation, right? But we're never going to get to that point. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. You know how it is in Washington, right? They spruce it up with all this language, and it's like you were saying earlier when I told you the story about giving our country to China. Mm-hmm. That's how people talk. They don't need some weird 600-page bill that talks in all this language nobody understands. And that's why, one of the things I think is really cool is the direct and ballot initiative items, because people know, but even that, you get propaganda all over the place about it.
Exactly. I mean, look, I don't know if there's a good way to fix it. And this is always what people are like, you throw a lot. And I'm like, listen, if I was the guy who could fix it, I'd be a genius, but I'm not. I'm just trying to highlight like what I think is wrong. There are a variety of different ways to fix it. At a very micro level, I'm frankly a fan of ranked choice voting. I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting. That being said, I already know that. Look, listen, if you're a partisan Republican, like, why would you give in? You'd be a fool to do it. Like, right. So somebody's going to sign away their own demise? Like, never. That's not going to happen. So what I like to focus on at the same time are like the good things. And I'll say the victory, which is, Nick, you know this. I think the stock ban is a huge victory. The idea that we're even talking about it. By the way, it's corrupt the way it's happening right now.
Oh yeah.
Because the bill's not the fake bill is not even going to pass. The fake bill in which they wrote loopholes in for themselves so they could still trade stocks is actually still not going to pass. That being said, the feel that they require the fact that they feel like they're required to even put forth the fake bill, that's a huge victory. Because people like us have been talking about corruption in Washington for so long. And Americans
we've seen Nancy Pelosi and her husband do it in real time the last 2 years.
My thing is too is like, yeah, I agree, which Pelosi in particular is just horrific. But let's put even that aside. Let's just talk about the hundreds of lawmakers that violate this act all the time. 72 lawmakers violated the Stock Act so badly that they had to pay a fine in the last 6 months. 72 different lawmakers, bipartisan, Republican and Democrat, people that you probably have never even heard of. That is the corruption. It's not just Pelosi. It's all the way up and down the chain. It's about Richard Burr, the senator, calling his own brother when he gets a briefing about coronavirus to say that the stock market's going to tank. Look, Mr. Burr must have great lawyers. Apparently he's not going to get charged. But listen, man, in the eyes of the public, you're guilty as sin. And you should be. We know we're not stupid. There are basic incentives. You have access to information that we don't have. You're allowed to trade stock. And a lot of you guys trade a lot. So, in my opinion, you're guilty and proven innocent. Like, I'm not trying you in a court of law. I'm just saying in the court of public opinion, you're guilty. Like, unless you can prove to me that you literally didn't know anything about this trade, you're guilty. Also, why are you even trading in the first place?
You shouldn't be trading at all. That's exactly it.
Listen, resign. Resign from Congress. If you want, go be my guest. You want to trade stocks, be a private citizen.
I don't even understand why some of these people who are so rich it's got to be the power. It's got to be ego. They want to be in Congress. Like, why isn't Pelosi retiring and going to hang out with her DUI husband? And,
here's the thing, man. They get off on the power. Like, they like it. I think they love being feted. They like being global leaders. It's fun to have a motorcade. It's fun to be at the White House. Listen, I've been there. I literally been in I've been in the motorcade. I've been at the White House. I've been in the halls of Congress. All these other people. There are people in this town whose entire identity is like the proximity to power and the like trappings of power. Does that make sense? Like, I've seen, these are some of the most empty, disgusting people in the nation. And you are never even going to know their names, but they're the ones who make everything work. And they have all the power, man. These people, no matter who's president, they live here. They're here to stay. Yeah.
That's depressing. Yeah. I had one thing you mentioned earlier I wanted to comment on.
Sure.
And this is what I said. Actually, until you spoke there, this is something I wanted to bring up, but then I didn't know if it would come up organically. But I always tell people, our job as a functioning member of this country, right? A citizen of this country, these United States, where we get to vote on who leads us, we tell you what we want, you fucking legislate it. Period. I don't care how you legislate it. I just know, like, to your point, we want a law as a society, as a country. We want a law that says you have to post schedules for any job at least 7 days in advance. I don't go legislate it. That's what we want. Go legislate it. We want, I'm huge for healthcare for all. Obviously, we probably have some disagreements on how that could be done, which is fine. But we want Medicare for all. We want healthcare for everyone in this country. Figure out how to pay for it. Figure out how to get it done. That's what we want. That's how government's supposed to work. It's not our job to write these laws or think so deeply, like you said, I don't know how to fix it. It's not our job to fix it. It's our job to tell them what we want. It's their job to fix it. It's their job to do it.
Well, look, even healthcare for all, look, I mean, to be honest, I completely agree. I think everybody in this country should have coverage. Now, as you alluded to, the disagreement there is probably going to be on, how exactly to do it. Single payer, multi-payer, NHS system, all this, public option, etc. There's a variety of different things. But the reason that a lot of these things don't happen is they want to make things too complicated. As I just said about the stock ban. They want to mire you in the language of blind trusts and advisors and ethics committee. It's all bullshit. Can they trade or not? Yeah. That's the question.
Well, that's how simple it should be.
Right.
Do you, citizens of this country, want the people making our laws to be able to trade stocks?
Right. And they're no.
Yes,
they're
no.
Universally no. Yeah, 90% of the population is absolutely not. And it's still not going to happen. And that's an important thing to do.
Right.
So
and
go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is where I get super frustrated with people like AOC who, God, I mean, I know what it's like to have an Instagram following and have, almost a pressure, right? I get people that tell me stay in your lane, reality star. We don't want to hear you talk about Roe v. Wade. We don't want to hear you talk about Elon Musk buying Twitter. Stay in your lane, your reality. It's I get it, but I'm so disappointed because she could come out and say that thing you just said to all of her millions or however many Instagram followers she has. And she could go out and she could put this in layman's term, rally people together and go lead a march or go actually get arrested for causing a ruckus like she promised to do and she never did. So where are these people? And this is where I've decided since 2020 and COVID and that election, I'm we can't vote, doesn't change anything. Politicians all cave. They all do what they're going to do. Sadly, big Bernie bro, Bernie too. And they just cave. They cave to the system. We got in the streets with Black Lives Matter. Nothing happened. We get in the streets with women's marches. Nothing happens. And that's an organizing thing because we're not organizing for anything. We're organizing against stuff. And we need someone, whether it's Christian Smalls, whether it's not going to be a politician, but God, maybe someday it will be. Organize people for something. Here's our list of demands. We're not going to do anything until we get it. And that's what I think we're missing to get actual change with this stuff.
Well, it's because, it's very easy to be famous. AOC gets to go to the Met Gala, And look, I don't want to talk too much shit about her because I just think it's boring, I think she's a fine character, whatever. At this point, I'm just you bore me. You're just a conventional person. Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel about all these people. I'm I don't look around and I'm excited about these folks. I could see how if you didn't really understand how Trump didn't do any of the things that he promised, why he would excite you. I get that. You and I said, look, I don't judge. If you want to vote for him, be my guest. I can explain to you, you say you care about X, and he didn't do X while he was in office. But at the end of the day, what I think a lot of people say is they would agree with everything you said. They're if we vote, it doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. So we might as well vote for somebody who just pisses off the side. But that's a grim thing in this country, ain't it? It's a grim thing. I've said this a million times, but to me, the 2020 election is all about this guy that I drove past in rural Nevada, outside of Reno. He literally lives in the middle of nowhere, by the side of the highway, and just had a massive sign that just said Trump 2020 : fuck your feelings. And I was that really is kind of all what it's about, though. Yeah. It is, though. That's what it's about. They're hey, fuck you. They're oh, you live in a city and you hate me and my way of life, fuck you. Mm-hmm. They're and you can take that all the way. By the way, again, I am not advocating for this, but I'm telling you, a lot of people feel that way. So we should think about it and just say, okay, how do we fix it? How do we fix that? How do we fix that? Again, we're just coming back, circle. That's what it's all about here, folks.
I agree. And I think back to Hillary Clinton's deplorables comment, and I just knew when she said that. By the way, I voted Jill Stein in 2016. If it was literally between Trump and Hillary, I probably would have taken a chance on Trump because we already knew what we were getting, and I'll probably get a lot of hate for that. Whatever, I don't care. But the bottom line is when you take those people and you're the face of the cities, right? Because you're the Democratic nominee, and you call them all deplorables, like that's a dividing statement. It's like if I were to go on and say everyone in reality TV is fake and sucks. Guess what? I just made enemy of thousands of people now and their fans, right? And so it's like you can't say stuff like that and expect it to not be a divide. And then to have these people who are being insulted by the liberal leader. I mean, what do you expect to happen? What do you expect to happen?
It's
Are
arrogance.
they that stupid? Yeah. Well,
no, it's arrogance. It's arrogance. That's what it is, which is that they look, and I think this is important, which is that for people here who are living in cities, all I ask is consider that not everybody is like you. Like, you know how everybody that you're friends with, happy hour and brunch and all that, you guys are like all really are like living, having a great time, and you guys all generally believe the same thing. Just consider that there are guys who are guys and girls coming off the shift who are drinking beers and who are watching football, who are literally living the exact same thing, except they believe the opposite of you. And they feel just as alienated and as opposed to you as you do to them. And then also consider that you're not morally superior to them. You're both American citizens. You both just have a vote. So I understand. And I think that moral superiority is the issue. And because, and maybe I'll be controversial when I say this, I generally think that today in 2020, the people who are, quote, downtrodden, they know that, they at least know that they are hated. I don't think that the people at the top really understand that people at the bottom hate them. No. They're like, why would anybody hate us? And I'm like, really? Like, why? Like, really? Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. And it's that moral superiority. And just funny note, like I literally lure my friends to happy hours and brunches so that I can pound them about how horrible Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are. and that I promised them that if Joe was the nominee, it was going to be horrible and a bloodbath. And anyway, they're sick of hearing it and sick of getting the memes.
You guys just enjoy brunch, all right? That's going to be my message. I want you guys to all just sit, enjoy, just relax, have a good time.
Yeah. All right, I got one more question. Then I'm going to give you a chance to ask me questions.
Okay.
So this is kind of two-folded. What do you think are the top issues for the populist right and left, if you have an opinion there? And then what do you think those are going to play? How do you think those are going to play into the midterms in a few weeks here?
Well, let's take populism out of it, because honestly, I don't think that there is a lot of quote movement in populist right or left, to be honest with you.
The left is dead, I can tell you. The left is just poke it with a stick.
I would generally agree. I mean, I think the right has basically just been subsumed entirely into the culture war, and I think that most of the people who ever pretended to care about economics have shown us pretty clearly that they don't. And I'm actually fine with that. I just want people to be honest. I'm like, look, if you literally only care about the culture war, fine, but just say it. You know, like just say that this, you're like, listen, this is all I care about. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty empty way to live your life, but whatever. So I think in terms of the midterms, the truth is that it's easy. I bet on the fundamentals. We have high crime and we have high inflation. Every single time that has happened in modern American history, the Republicans have won in a landslide. Add on to that the compounding variable of that the party in power almost always loses the first midterm election. So you put those two things together, and I think it is very likely to be a GOP sweep. The only seats that I think are in contention at all are Arizona and Georgia. But I do, if I had to put money on it, I think the Republicans win both of those seats. I think we're probably going to see a 25, maybe, I think we're seeing like a 25 seat gain in the House for Republicans, maybe 30.
Wow.
It's not a huge gain, but it's pretty big.
Well, the good news is they'll do nothing, just like everyone in power always does,
right.
And then we'll come into 2024, and
yes,
if Joe's able to find his way onto the debate stage, we'll be in, I guess, a rematch. I don't even.
Welcome to America, folks. It's a fun country.
Cool. Anything you want to ask me? I'm going to open the floor. It can be anything you want.
Let's think. I'm not going to pry into your marriage or divorce. I'm frankly not that interested. And you probably don't even want to go into it. I am. Well, I'm interested in what it was like to become famous for your relationship, because like everybody who knows me kind of knows me for my work, whereas everybody who knows you literally for your personal life. That must be very, very difficult, and I can't really imagine what that's like.
So That's a really freaking good question.
Yeah.
And it's so multifaceted because growing up, I always thought I actually wanted to be a professional wrestler, a filmmaker, or president. Those were my ambitions. And I always realized I kind of realized this older, like I like the storytelling element, but I don't want to be the center of attention. And so the funny thing about this, and this is where I'm like, maybe life is a simulation, but the idea that I would get a platform or get any type of fame, I always thought it would be for my ideas, the way that the stories I'm telling in filmmaking, the stories, or my ideas to run for president and what platform would be like, all of that kind of stuff. And then to realize that I got famous for the absolute most simplest way you can. The only thing that maybe would have been different is if I like rose through the ranks of influencing and was just a full-time influencer. But to realize that like I need to adapt in this way, and then to realize that like a lot of the people that know me for my relationship or know me for being on that show don't really give a shit about what we're talking about, and they sure as hell don't. Yeah, they sure as hell.
They should, it's fine.
It totally is.
My guess. Yeah,
that's how I feel, and that's why I'm like, hey, you want me to stay in my lane as a reality star? Well, what lane is that? The show's over. So what do I do now? Because there is no residual. I always say Netflix brink truck that drops a pile of cash off every week, and that's how I live. So what's so bizarre to me is that people think your relationship is all that there is to you. And that is the hardest part that I've had to overcome.
Oh, that's weird.
Even this time I was out with my CEO, his wife, couple coworkers. We went out for drinks right after the show came out, after a hard day of work. And people were like, where's Danielle? Where's Danielle? Where's your wife? I'm like, I'm out with coworkers. Guess what? That's allowed.
Yeah.
Or a few months ago, my friend from the UK was in town. And it was right as there was some speculation of what was going on. And this whole like thing came out that like I had moved on and maybe this was and I'm like, my friend from the UK was here. And by the way, we were never out alone because I'm aware of the speculation and I don't want to feed it. And we were in a group of friends. So it's like that kind of stuff where people only see you as that relationship or as a reality TV personality. That's the part that like I can't grasp because I don't look at you or Crystal or Kyle or anyone and think this is all that you do. Like I would imagine that you go see Top Gun or that you hang out with your dog or you go on a vacation with your girlfriend. You don't look at the news. That's how normal people are. We're very nuanced. There's a lot of things that are going on. And I think the hardest part for me to like overcome, especially now as I'm trying to do this and, I'm working on some other stuff too, like teaching people that there's more to me and that being on a reality show is like the 5,000th thing that you should know about me. And that there's a lot of other things that go into who I am. There's a reason I make my own toothpaste. There's a reason I make my own body wash. There's a reason that I go out and watch football with my friends. And it's because, hey, there's a me outside of the hour and a half of Love is Blind that you watched of my life.
That must be maddening. I can't even imagine. Yeah, cause I mean, I put out thousands of hours of content, and even I get annoyed when people are like reductive or like, you said this one. I'm like, listen, man, like I can't sit here and explain to you the fulsome nature of my thoughts on reparations. Okay, like that's just not going to come through. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, it's funny because all my friends are like, "Oh my god, you got to ask him about this and this." I'm like, "Yeah, it just seems very pedantic." Like as you said at the beginning, you don't even really talk to these people, and at the same time, like, why would I expect that you would intimately know the details of like a deep D or a shit? It's like, have you even seen these people in a long time? Probably not. So like, how would you know? I had a lot of sympathy for Deep D. I get it, and her and I are actually both South Indians. It was kind of funny, like her parents and all that. And I think Shake was definitely an asshole. But I think she's taken it far. I think I can't imagine, actually. Although in a way, I mean, you tell me, is he authentic to himself or is it like, what's he like when the camera's off? To me, because I literally do this for a living. Okay. Well, then in a way, I almost respect it. I'm like, wow, he's actually exactly the same. I'm like, odious, but be difficult.
So that's the funny thing I've realized in going through all this process. So first of all, like, he used to like ask me, can we be friends now? And I'd be like, no. Like, and this was before anything happened.
Interesting.
And then there was one time we had everyone out at Danielle's mom's lake house. Not everyone, but Shake came. And we were all out at the local bar drinking all this stuff. And I said to him, you're really not that bad. And that's probably the nicest thing I've ever said to him. You're really not that bad. And then the next day and this is after like telling him like, no, we're not going to be friends. Like I'm not friends with people that say these things that you say.
Yeah.
And it's called boundaries. Try it. And he texted me the next day or 2 days later maybe. And he's like, do you remember that you said this? And I sent him a Trump gif back that said, don't be a cutie pie. Mm-hmm. And that was like really the last text exchange we had outside of, but it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, man, my only advice, I guess, or take it for what it is just keep doing what you're doing. I think you have probably the healthiest outlook. I frankly think it's really gross watching some of these people like grasp for clout and clear money grabs. I'm like, you think I'm stupid? I'm like, you think I don't know what's going on here? Yeah. And by the way, it's not just me. Everybody knows. I'm like, oh, I know. Gross. It's like you come right out and it's like you're just shilling like makeup and stuff. It's like, geez, man, like have some respect for yourself. Yeah.
Well, that's why like I actually just signed with a new agent and I told him, I'm like, if it's not something I use in my everyday life, like don't waste my time with it.
Good for you.
Don't waste my time. Like I had a couple like Head and Shoulders reached out. I'm like, I don't have dandruff, and if I did, I wouldn't use Head and Shoulders. So no, thank you. Like, that kind of stuff.
Good for you.
So,
good for you. Yeah. I respect that.
I know we're up on time, but do you have any other questions you wanted to ask?
Dude, that's it. I don't really care about all the drama. I just enjoy talking to you. It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. This was a good time, and I'm really glad you came on. It was fun.
Cool, then. Thanks, bro.
All right. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Saagar Enjeti. You can find him on Instagram at eSaagar. That's ESAAGAR. You can also find him on Twitter. You can find Breaking Points with Crystal and Saagar on YouTube or any of your podcast streaming platforms, along with his other podcast called The Realignment, available on all podcast platforms and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Conversations with Nick Thompson. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to follow us and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Links can be found in the description below, and we can't wait to see you next time.